Welcome to the Why I'm Right Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Taylor, and if you don't know me, you're about to learn a whole lot about me. Now, some of you may be asking what this podcast is or why I'm starting this podcast, and I think first and foremost, that's where we need to start. You know, we're at a time right now in our nation's history, in our country's history, where things are happening around us that frankly don't make sense. And I'm entering a new phase in my life. I'm a father. And I'm getting into a point where if we sit back and allow what's going on in this country to continue going on, we're heading down a road where I don't know where it leads. And so this podcast, we're going to take a deep dive into where we as a people are heading, deep dive into the major issues that are going on in our country, because for so long, for a long time, we've been lied to. And for the first time, ordinary people like you, like me, now have an ability to control the narrative that I don't believe we've ever had before. With the rise of social media and, frankly, the fall of mainstream media, there's always been people out there that have questioned or come up with a conspiracy theory or ask why we're doing the things we're doing. But for the first time, I believe we have a chance to win the battle. And when I say that, we need to start asking the whys, you know, and this whole podcast will kind of take a deep dive into the issues that I believe are impacting you and I every single day. And for example, today, we're going to dive into illegal immigration, because there's not a person out there. There's not a Democrat out there. There's not a left-wing person out there. There frankly isn't a right-wing person out there that can sit back and look at what's going on in our country and say this is a good idea, or give you one legitimate reason as to one legitimate benefit to allowing millions of people to cross into our country illegally when we don't know who they are, where they're coming from, and what the reason is that they're coming here. Now, that doesn't mean if you're against illegal immigration that you aren't for immigration. There's a big difference, right? If someone comes into the country, they're seeking asylum, there's a process in place right now where they can get here, seek their asylum, be granted their asylum, and get here. And the key word to this whole thing is legally. But there isn't a person out there, and if you could find them, send them my way, because I want to know, what is the legitimate reason that we're allowing millions of people into this country when, frankly, we as a nation aren't thriving today? Now, the reason this podcast, I really wanted to do this podcast is because, like I started out saying, we've been lied to for so long, and I believe the straw that ended the whole thing and really took the turn, and people are fed up, was COVID-19. Now, forget about what COVID was, but if we sit back now and play Monday morning quarterback and look at the facts and see what COVID was for what it was a sham. And the reality is, everyday people, you, me, and everyone included, kind of sat back and allowed the government to take control and do things with really no basis. You look across really many of the issues today, and they all go back, and there's a why behind them that we need to start asking so that we can prevent the next COVID. Because, frankly, if during COVID-19 you sat there and you said, hey, this disease came from China, you were told or called a racist, and you were told you were wrong. But now we're sitting back, again, Monday morning quarterback, and we're able to say, well, hold on a second. Not only did COVID-19 come from China. It came from a lab in China that we, the United States government, you, a taxpayer in this country, me, a taxpayer in this country, paid for. So when we find out the facts after, years later, it really starts to come together. And again, I don't want to sit here and say COVID was an absolute fake disease, but I could say pretty much without a doubt that there was an agenda at play behind COVID-19 that we knew about, because the same people, Dr. Fauci, the same people, Bill Gates, the same people that sat there and said you're racist or stop Asian hate are the people that funded the lab in China and allowed COVID-19 to come to this country for an ulterior motive, which we've now learned was a vaccine, or which we now learned was to control small businesses, which we've now learned had an ulterior motive behind it. And so when I sit back and I look at, for example, the illegal immigration crisis, which is a crisis, by the way, going on at our border every single day, and now it's up to millions of people. We're not talking 100 people, 1,000 people, even 10,000 people. We're talking about millions of people entering this country illegally, which, by the way, like I said, there is a system in place that people can come to this country legally, and we know where they're going. We are a country that was founded on immigration. We are a country that's founded on legal immigration. Now, you look back, I grew up in New Jersey, and when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, we went to Ellis Island multiple times. And every time we went there for a field trip or whatever it was, we heard the stories of how people got on a boat from Europe, came to this country, and they were turned away. Whether that was for disease, whether they didn't have a sponsor, whatever the reason was, they were turned away. Again, is that good? Is that bad? We can debate that another time. But the reality is, yes, we're a country founded on immigration, but we're founded on legal immigration. And when we look at what's going on today, I have to ask the whys, right? The whole point of this podcast is to ask the whys. And when I look at it, I believe I figured out the why behind this crisis. The why that I see is predominantly right now, if you look at our Congress, you look at the Senate, you look at the House of Representatives, you look at the president, right now the people who tend to say things like there is no crisis at the border, or we should allow these people into the country, which, like I said, I started this out by saying, if you have somebody out there that has a legitimate reason for why we're doing this, bring them to me. Send them my way. Have them respond to this somehow. Because no one in their right mind could give you a legitimate answer. But I figured it out. When you look at the predominantly Democrat representatives that are out there advocating for these migrants, actually Joe Biden, the president of the United States, during his State of the Union address, got a lot of flack, a lot of heat for calling them illegal immigrants or illegal migrants or the illegal migrant crisis. And frankly, it starts by saying we have a problem, right? If you have alcoholism or you have, an addiction issue, the first thing that they teach you is you have to say you have a problem so we can address the problem. And I don't call it a slip up. The Democrats do. They said it was a slip up. He shouldn't have called them illegals. Well, he should. And what I'll say is this. If you look at it and you take a deep dive into why we're allowing these people into the country, you have to look at the whole picture. So these people come into the country illegally through the Mexican border. That's what I'm talking about right now. The Mexican border, and predominantly they're coming where? They're coming through Texas, a Republican state. Now, things are changing in Texas. That's another issue. But people coming into the border to Texas, and what happens there? Texas, you've all seen it. Texas had an argument with the Supreme Court, cases. They're trying to get them out. They're trying not to let them in. They're putting barbed wire, and the federal government's taking it down. So Texas is trying to protect their own border, and the federal government is saying no. Now again, why? So these people come through the border, they end up in Texas, and Governor Abbott is now saying, hey, we got a problem. And it started with DeSantis in Florida. It started in a few places where they started sending them from historically strongholds right now. Texas, Florida, probably the two strongholds, I would say, with the most Republican governors, right? And they were sending them from their state, Florida or Texas, and sending them to New York City, sending them to California. And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out why, when you look at it and you start saying, okay, they're coming to Texas, they're being shipped to sanctuary cities in New York City, in Philadelphia, in Chicago, Illinois, in Pennsylvania, everywhere. They're sending them from the state they entered into your backyard, my backyard. And again, I continue to ask why. And then you look at some of these programs going on right now. Now, if you're a veteran in this country, the government doesn't help you. They don't. People that served, people that got their arms blown off, people who sacrificed, they don't get help. But what happens if you live in New York City? I say live. What happens if you broke the law to enter our country illegally into Texas and you're shipped or bused or flown in to New York City? Now, I don't know if you heard about this, but in New York City right now, if you're an illegal immigrant, you don't have a social security number, the New York City mayor and the New York City government in New York, what are they doing? They're giving them free housing. Now again, good or bad? I'd say if you're putting them up in hotels in New York City for free, again, nothing's free. You and I are paying for it. Our taxes are paying for it. So they're being sent into these cities. Again, I'm going to stick with New York for a second here. They're sent into New York City. They get free housing in nice hotels. And now the government, and again, the mayor, is saying, hold on, that's not enough. We're now going to give them credit cards, preloaded debit cards. So now not only do they have free housing, they're now getting free food, free groceries that you're paying for. Again, I go back to it. If you're a veteran in New York City, you don't get to stay in the hotel. You paid your taxes, you don't get to stay in the hotel. But if you're an illegal immigrant right now, you get to stay in a hotel. We're going to pay for your food, pay for your health care. And that's the other issue. Look at California. Right now, California has laws on the books where they're out there saying, if you're an illegal, we're going to give you free health care. Okay? So we're talking about free housing, free food, free health care. Again, I use the word free. It's not free. You and I are paying for it. But again, I go back to the why. So I started this thing in Texas. We're now shipping them to New York, shipping them across the country into these sanctuary cities, or what I'll call Democrat stronghold cities, right? If Trump lost in 2020, and he lost Pennsylvania, again, I use my own experience. I use my own eyes. I went to school in North Carolina, and I would drive home. This is not too many years ago. I would drive home from North Carolina through Pennsylvania on 81, and you drive through Pennsylvania, and you're seeing a barn with the Trump-Pence sticker on it. You drive a little bit further down, you're seeing Trump. If Trump lost Pennsylvania, where was it from? It was from Philadelphia, the inner cities in Philadelphia. Again, we go back to this whole issue. Goes back to these Democrat stronghold cities where they have these programs that, again, you and I are funding that don't make any sense. And so, again, I go back to the New York, California illegal immigrant crisis today, and I ask, why? Why would California pay for the health care of an illegal immigrant? Why would New York City pay for a house or a hotel room or for food? And I figured it out. The goal, I'm going to call this the Great Replacement Theory. Okay? And the reality is, again, if these people come into these cities, these Democrat stronghold cities, and they increase the population, we're not talking, I started this podcast by saying, we're not talking about a few hundred people. We're talking about millions and millions of people. So if you increase the population in LA, you increase the population in New York City, you increase the population in Chicago, Illinois, you increase the population in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and all of a sudden, what's the result? The result is, when the next census comes out, if the population is greater in those areas now are going to have more representation in our U.S. government. Again, a lot of people don't know this, so I'll take a second. Easy Civics 101, right? Senators, 2 per state. There's 100 senators, 50 states, 2 per state. House of Representatives is based on population. Electoral college. Again, this is how we decide who is the president of the United States. It goes back to the Electoral College. And if you have more people in your city, in your state, that state will have more representation in the House of Representatives and will have more representation in the Electoral College, therefore making those Democrat-run cities, those Democrat-run states, now have an easier path to victory for a presidential election and more votes on issues that affect you and affect me. So again, I go back to it. We need to start asking the whys. And this one seems simple to me. It took me a while to get there, but this one seems pretty simple. How many people do you know? I live in Florida. How many people do you know? And again, I'm using my own experience here. I lived in New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey. A lot of friends, a lot of family in New York. A lot of people are leaving New York City and going to Florida, going to Texas, going because they want freedom. They don't want to pay endless taxes, especially when you see the result with these programs I'm talking about. Now, people are leaving those cities, and the Great Replacement Theory is, oh crap, if everyone leaves New York City, never going to happen, but if a lot of people leave New York City and go to Florida, Republican stronghold, well, when the next census comes out and the population of Florida goes up and the population of New York City goes down, oh crap, New York, Electoral College, now going to be worth less. Florida, Republican stronghold, now going to be worth more. And this is going on across the country. So as much as it makes sense, again in Florida, DeSantis started this whole thing, sending them to Martha's Vineyard to go hang out with Obama, saying, hey, we're going to allow these people in the country. I'm going to send them up so it affects you. It sounds good on paper, but these people are smarter than we think. These people have an agenda that goes so much deeper than you and I think, because they planned this out the same way they planned out COVID, the same exact way. So you and I need to start diving deeper into these issues and being able to see what this really is. Because if we allow what's going on every single day, and this is just one issue here, it's a big issue. Illegal immigration is a big issue because we see what happens. We don't know these people. You see what happened in Georgia. An innocent girl got killed by who? An illegal immigrant. An illegal migrant. And Biden gets flack for using the word illegal. So when you start looking at these issues and you start seeing them for what they are, you start realizing, I don't want to say how far behind we are, but if we don't see it, we can't stop it. Right? I said we started this again. I go back to it. If we got a problem, the first step to fixing it is admitting we got a problem. And right now, we got a problem. Because, again, this election is coming up. And many people think these illegals are going to vote this time. I don't think so. It might happen here and there. But I think this is about the future. Because if we can increase the population in New York City and California, Florida's not going to mean much. Right? I mean, these areas that are getting the influx of migrants right now and incentivizing these people, hey, if you come to California, we're going to pay for your shit. And I started again. If I was somebody living in Mexico or living in a country and I heard, hey, you have cancer or whatever it is, you got something, an ailment to your body that you need fixed. You need surgery. Well, if I'm going to do that, and I have to, right? I'm going to die if I don't. And my choices are limited. I could stay in Mexico, get paid for my surgery, or I could just walk across the border right now, get shipped into California, get great health care, paid for by you and me. And that's where, again, if you know somebody that has a legitimate argument for why we're allowing these people, millions of people that we know nothing about, send them my way. Because enlighten me. I'll be the first person to say, hey, you know what? You're right. That makes sense. But when no one can explain it, and when you see the signaling that we're seeing, we have to start figuring it out. And we have to start thinking for ourselves. And like I said, this podcast is the first one. This podcast is something that we're going to keep looking into the issues because guess what? Every day we get closer and closer to the election, there's a lot on the line here. A lot on the line. And we see what's going on. We saw what happened in the last election. And whether you fell for it or not, whether you think Trump won or not, the reality is this. They're playing a different game than you and I. Right? They got these 100,000, whatever it is at this point. How many felony charges does Trump have right now? And I get it. Every time they charge him, people start waking up. But we go back to the 2020 election, and when we go back to COVID, again, I don't want to keep circling here, but again, when we see what happened in 2020, and we now have the Monday morning quarterback ability to look back and see it for what it was. We funded a lab in Wuhan, China that you paid for, that I paid for. That lab started COVID-19. They then used COVID-19 to tank the economy, to force people to do mail-in ballots on a mass scale, and somehow Joe Biden ends up with more votes than anyone in the history of this country. Make that make sense. Make that make sense. And people out there will say, oh, well, a lot of people went out to vote against Trump. Well, good luck. A lot of people are seeing it now for what it is. But there are a lot of, frankly, I don't like making this one-sided, but there are a lot of Democrats that are blind to this right now. And they're falling for the same thing. But that's what gets me excited about this podcast, and that's what gets me excited about where we're heading right now, because guess what? The mainstream media no longer is a monopoly. Think about that. The mainstream media, for how long in this country, had a monopoly on information. If you turned on the television, you could only hear the news they wanted you to hear. You could only see the clips they wanted you to see. That's not happening anymore, because there are a million of me. And when I say that, there are a lot of people who are going to use their voice and try to bring light to things that, if there was only mainstream media, and you only can get the newspaper, and you only can turn on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, whatever it is, if that was all we had, we'd be in big trouble right now. But people are starting to wake up and see what is really going on in this country. So yes, this is a shorter episode here. We're going to have longer episodes. We're going to, like I said, we're going to dive into a lot of issues. I wanted to touch on a few of them here. I think you can see it. Obviously, there's a lot of passion about what happened with COVID, because they did so much stuff and took so much power and closed so many businesses and ruined so many lives, so many families. For what? For an election? Again, you find out now, the CDC says COVID's not going anywhere. COVID's here to stay. COVID's the new flu. So every season you can get your COVID-19 shot, paid for by Bill Gates, because COVID's not going anywhere. What happened to stop the spread? What happened to, hey, if everyone gets vaccinated, this thing's gone? Nope. Now we're going to need to get COVID vaccines for eternity. And again, there's a lot of passion behind that, because I believe the next COVID is already happening. And again, I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about them using something. Them using fear tactics and putting the death rate on the screen at CNN. And them telling you, if you don't get the vaccine, grandma's going to die. The fear tactics, the manipulation, right? I mean, you guys can't forget what happened, because we now have the facts. Maybe not all of them. But again, I start by saying, if you said COVID came from China years ago, you were a conspiracy theorist racist. Well, how about now? How about when I said that a few years ago, I was a racist, but now I'm right? Right? I mean, again, that's what I'm scared is. Guess what? COVID was the most in your face. But this stuff goes on every single day in this country. So I go back to it. There's a lot of passion about a lot of issues that are going on, and we're going to dive into them all. Every single day, we're going to attack this thing together. And I need you to share these videos. And I need you to go out and try to push the message, because guess what? Whether they're Democrat, they're Republican, they're white, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're male, they're female, I don't care who it is. We all know people that blindly accept the narrative. And I don't think that's a good thing for anybody. You got to ask the whys. You got to find out really what's going on. So send these videos to your friends and have a conversation. We're not going to agree on everything. If you sit there and listen to me day in, day out, and do you agree with everything I say? Great. But the reality is we need to have these conversations, because if we don't, we as a nation are heading for death. And I know that's scary to say, but the reality is we need to start questioning the whys. And again, let me know what you think about this, right? But think about the Great Replacement Theory. I'm calling it that. Again, it comes down to, why are these Democrat stronghold cities? And this is the first question I'm asking on this podcast. And I'm sure we'll hit this issue again, because it's happening every day. But the question that I want answered is, why would California pay for health care for illegals and not their own people? Why would New York City do what they're doing? And the only logical thing that makes sense to me is the Great Replacement Theory. They want illegals entering the country for one purpose, and that is to distort the Electoral College and gain representation for Democrat-run states. It's simple. It is simple. If more people end up in New York City, in California, in LA, in Philadelphia, guess what? More Electoral College votes for them. I mean, guys, we have to ask these questions. And if that's not the reason, that sure as hell is a bad part of this, right? This is an outcome from this. So again, this is the first episode. We'll dive in much, much deeper, and we'll dive into more issues. And if you got issues you want to address, send them my way. I'm going to be out there looking for more things to cover, because guess what? Every day we get closer and closer to Election Day, and every day is more and more important. So again, this is the Why I'm Right podcast, and I'm telling you why I'm right.